negotiated, many of the countries who wanted to be part of it, also had some reservations about,
Yes
of
po.
course, if you sign onto a treaty like this, then this is for long term, and you don't really know how this will have implications for issues pertaining to territory, boundaries down the line. So China had those reservations, and it was clear in expressing those exceptions. No? Yung, ano niya. In the case of the Philippines, we also had some. No?
Yes po. Sa,
Um, yeah, right. No? So I think it wasn't so much the that China considered itself exempt from arbitration, but that it did not anticipate that unilaterally somebody could sue. I mean, could file for arbitration without the consent, because that's not the usual practice, and yet there were, I guess, loopholes, no, in the law that would allow it.
so parang in the span of the negotiations, parang pwede po sinasabi ng China na hindi po namin i-honor tong ruling na to. So, paano pag nag-pursue ng militarization ba rin po yung China doon sa South China Sea? Paano po siya makaka-apekto po sa claim natin doon sa EEZ natin?
Yun sa easy. When you say negotiations, you mean our discussions with China
Yes.
on the South China Sea issue, on the Scarborough Shoal. Actually, under the Aquino government, the government had already given up on negotiations with China, so there was nothing, no mechanism for bilateral consultations or negotiations after we had filed the case. No? How will this impact? Actually, I guess a big power like China or like the US, you really cannot force it to comply with international law or resolutions or international public opinion if they don't see it in their national interest. So, China is not alone in that. No? It's not unique behavior for China, but nonetheless, there will be calculations. There will be costs for if China refuses to comply with the ruling, then first there will be international reputational costs. And this comes at the time when China wants to project its own global influence. It has its own ambitions of becoming a global maritime power. No? And I think eventually China will realize that to be a leader, you have to, if you want to be a leader, say, as a maritime nation, as a maritime power, then you will have to obey the rules. Because, leadership means playing by certain rules, and nobody will follow you or extend to you their support or even alliances or align with you if you are seen as an exceptionalist, that if you feel that you are not covered by the rules, if you're above the law. So China will have to figure out what it really wants. If it wants to be a global maritime power, if it wants the support of other members of the international community, then it has to first demonstrate that it can be trusted. It can be trusted to play by the rules that other countries have already agreed to. It's not going to be an easy process. So what is important is we, aside from observing what China says, looking at what China does. So after July 12, of course, China's reaction was, it completely rejects. This is just a mere scrap of paper. Doesn't mean anything. It's not going to affect our sovereignty, our territory, and so on. Now, that is what China says. On the other hand, if you look at the behavior of China after the ruling, you will find that in contrast to just before the ruling, um, China has not been mentioning its 9-line claim. No? Um, so I think, of course, despite the strong domestic opposition in China and the leaders and China's leaders, of course, still insisting that the ruling doesn't apply to them, you can observe that they have begun moderating their actions. No? So have we seen any reports, media reports, say in recent months, say harassment of fishermen or active patrols, up to the, say, the southernmost extent of the 9-line? We haven't. No? So these are things that they used to do before the ruling. And now, of course, we can say that they're not doing it anymore, completely. No? But they are probably refraining from any actions that will bring them criticism as violating the ruling. So in particular yung sa 9-line, so they have not been pushing it the way they used to. No?
So in relation to that, magagamit po ba natin yung multilateral cooperation with other Southeast Asian nations in a way, not really legally, but politically related so with the South China Sea at this point? Especially ASEAN.
Yeah, we have been trying, di ba? Of course, ang problema sa ASEAN is you have 10 countries na not all of them are claimants. So, yung non-claimants, you will not expect them to stick their neck out on this issue. No? Dito sa 10 countries, some of them are very close to China. So, China is the main source of investments, ODA, it's a major market for export products. So that also is a major consideration for them. So before these countries really take a position on the arbitration in particular, they also have to make an assessment. So ano ba yung national interest nila sa arbitration? So if they see this, for instance, as Cambodia does, that this is really an issue between the Philippines and China. We don't want to get involved. We don't want ASEAN to be involved. Then it's difficult to persuade Cambodia. Other countries, even non-claimants, but Vietnam is a claimant. So Vietnam, among all of the ASEAN states, was the most supportive of the ruling. In fact, they were practically the only one, even compared to maybe US, no, that came out with strong statements of support. No. But the rest of the ASEAN countries were very measured in their response to the ruling. But countries like, say, Indonesia or Singapore, they're not claimants, but they depend very much on regional stability for their own economic growth, for their own peace of mind, especially Singapore, which is a very small state. So for Singapore, rule of law is very important. It's a vital national interest as far as they're concerned. Because they're so small, potentially there are so many threats against Singapore. They're entirely dependent on trade. They don't have their own water. They don't produce their own food. So regional order that is not based on rules can be very chaotic as far as Singapore is concerned. So from that perspective, Singapore is a strong supporter of peaceful settlement of disputes, but even the use of international law. So it serves Singapore's general interest. So iba-iba yun. Now, can we use ASEAN collectively? We can if we are able to persuade all the member states that we are doing this not to promote Philippine territorial or even resource entitlements. No? It's not about Philippine sovereignty or Philippine sovereign rights. But if we can persuade them that this is about a rules-based order, it's about constraining the propensity of big powers to behave coercively towards small countries. No? So if that kind of argument can be made and if it's persuasive, then I think pwedeng gamitin ang ASEAN. But we're nowhere near that situation. At best, because ASEAN has been engaged with China for many, many years, di ba? So since 1999, we were negotiating a code of conduct. In 2002, we had only a declaration of conduct, no? And yet we said in 2002, we will still persist. We still want a legally binding code of conduct, no? So it's been many years already, no? And yet we haven't concluded. And the reason is not only because China doesn't want it, it's because other ASEAN countries are, it's not their priority. And some are even afraid that a code of conduct will constrain their actions, not just China's, but everybody's actions. So if you have intentions of, say, engaging in capability building of your law enforcement or your navy, then a code of conduct might limit that, because it should apply to all. You cannot just tell China to stop modernizing your military, stop building, because everybody will have to do that. So it's going to be an uphill climb to persuade ASEAN, politically, to really unite on the South China Sea issue. But that said, I think the arbitration has an important contribution to make, because prior to July 12, Philippines was perceived as, it's just another claimant. Your claim is as strong or as weak as anybody else's. So why should we support you? We have no proof of that the basis of your claim is better than China's or Vietnam's or anyone's, diba, for that matter. Moreover, Philippines is the only, I guess, functioning treaty ally of the United States in ASEAN, diba? Thailand is an ally. They also have a mutual defense treaty. But for all intents and purposes, it's not a well-functioning alliance because Thailand is very close to China. And not too much in favor of U.S. policy in the region. So, what was I saying? Yeah, I guess Philippines is seen as Philippines is seen as an outlier in that sense, no? Because we are a U.S. ally, because especially the previous government tried very much to get the U.S. involved and to get the U.S. to commit to defense of the Philippines. Now, many of the ASEAN countries, they don't want the U.S. excessively involved in this issue. Of course, other than Cambodia and Myanmar, that traditionally are neutralist sila. Neutralism is very strong in Cambodia and Myanmar historically. Also Indonesia, Malaysia, non-aligned naman ang preference ng Indonesia and Malaysia, I mean from the Cold War up to the present, because they don't like the idea of superpower intervention. So, plus the complications with majority Muslim populations, U.S. policy, say in Middle East, in Afghanistan, in the global war on terror. This is not popular among Indonesians or Malaysians because it's seen as anti-Muslim. So Indonesia and Malaysia will have difficulty supporting a strong U.S. presence in the region because their own people don't like it. So these are, some of the considerations. So each country will have to figure out, based on their own interests, what to do about U.S. or China. So if ASEAN comes to a common position on this issue, I suspect it will be a shallow consensus, no? Like yung Declaration of Conduct, which if you look at the text, it's all motherhood statements. No? Even if we have a so-called legally binding code of conduct, we have no assurances that it will be legally binding because even the arbitration ruling, which is supposed to be final and binding to China can afford to say this doesn't count. We're not going to do this. So how different would a legally binding code of conduct be from what the arbitration is already saying? So ganong questions. The ASEAN countries are all concerned about the rise of China and what it will mean for the region. They're all worried that China will be aggressive, coercive, dominating in its relations with smaller states. They're also worried that say China-Japan conflict might erupt or China-US conflict might erupt, and they don't want that. So I think ASEAN can easily find consensus around issues like peaceful settlement of disputes, non-use or threat of force, exercising self-restraint, and then rules-based order, reliance on international law, including UNCLOS. So all of these statements you will find in ASEAN agreements, in ASEAN declarations. But beyond that, what solution do they propose to the South China Sea? Wala. No? So we haven't come to that, walang unity on this issue.
So ma'am, if we focus on the Philippines lang po, how do you propose if there isn't yet anything that we can do in terms of the ASEAN relations that can back our actions? So how should the Philippines proceed in terms of its relations with China, especially considering our ties with them, like economically? So how do you think the administration should proceed with our relations?
Yeah. Well, this administration has already shown its hands, diba? That it wants friendly relations with China. Its priority is to benefit from economic cooperation, no? So trade, investments, especially infrastructure, and then after that, cooperation on transnational crime, drugs. That's the priority. Now, at the same time, it comes President Duterte comes into office armed with this arbitration ruling and under pressure from both the domestic public as well as the international community to see to it that the ruling is put to good use. And for the original intention, which is to try to underscore to China, that we're all parties to UNCLOS, we're all subject to the same rules. China has no special entitlements. There's no such thing as the 9-dash line. So basically, the whole arbitration was to challenge China's expansive claims that have no basis in law. So that should be the outcome. That is the outcome that all who support the arbitration want to see happen. And it's not going to happen unless the Philippines pushes it, because it's our case, it's our legal victory.
So we should assert.
We should assert Now, it becomes a question of strategy, di ba? We had, almost 6 years during the Aquino administration of confrontation with China. So high tensions, a lot of word wars, no? And then hardly any bilateral dialogue going on. And if you look at the outcome, was the confrontational approach successful? Did we get access to fisheries resources? No. Did we find a way to explore the oil and gas in the reed bank? No. Were we able to, strengthen our presence on Ayungin Shoal, repair this rusty old ship that stands as our garrison? No. Pinaharang nila. No? So we weren't fishing, we weren't exploring for oil, we couldn't even defend the features that we already had. So where was this kind of confrontational strategy taking us? Well, we got the support of some countries, of course those who were also afraid of China, like the US, Japan, or those who did not want China to overpower the region. Maybe they weren't afraid, but they were basically anti-China. So we got some support on that end. But at the end of the day, we have a ruling that is in our favor, but is right now unenforceable. So how do we assert it? And that's where you have to be smart. China needs a face-saving solution. Diba? So we've already tried yung naming and shaming na approach sa China. Diba? And if you understand Chinese culture, there is nothing as offensive as being named and shamed publicly. Face is very important to them. So if there is a very creative approach that will allow us to assert in a non-confrontational manner, to continue to demand from China what the arbitral tribunal says we are entitled to, no? without aggravating the tensions or the disputes. So ayaw ng China ng naming and shaming. Ang isa pa, ayaw ng China na tinatakot siya, no? Na etong US kakampi namin yan. So, and which is why, fortuitously, we have a new administration, and the new president has already said gusto niya ng independent foreign policy. Sinabi rin niya na galit siya sa Amerikano. Mura-mura dyan. So, that causes China to think. Either China can decide to cooperate with the Duterte administration and maybe have 6 years of a friendly Philippine government. Meaning, not so eager to bring in the US, hindi shame ang China, not so confrontational, and so on. So if China behaves now, it can get 6 years of this, or China can simply assert its own, behave the way it used to behave before the ruling, or even worse. But the outcome will be, ayun nga, baka babalik na naman tayo dun sa kind of policies we had under Aquino.
Ma'am, yung, syempre po, medyo sikat na po sa atin na yung gustong i-undertake ni Duterte ay yung joint development with China with regard to this Baviera. Pero yung mayroon po prevailing belief na unconstitutional po siya. So, sa tingin mo po ba, paano to, what's your take on this issue?
Yeah. Itong joint development, this has been a long-standing question in our whole approach to the disputes. In the international community, there are many countries that have successfully undertaken joint development in disputed territories. Most of these are bilateral, so they are probably simpler than what we might try to do in the South China Sea, because some of the disputes are multilateral. In this practice, you might say that it's a multilateral dispute. So how can the Philippines, we've tried this, no? We had a JMSU with China, and then we brought in Vietnam. One is there is simply not enough strategic trust among the parties to really pursue it. Second is, it was deemed unconstitutional even for the Philippines to open up some of these areas for joint development. But it has worked. I mean, the concept, the notion, the practice of joint development has worked for other countries. But those countries need to have strong political will to resolve the issues. No? Usually, kung mataas ang stakes, I mean, if you don't do joint development, then the chances of conflict are very high. Then that's a strong incentive to do joint development. In our case, in Philippine case, very legalistic yung naging approach natin. No? Kung ang attitude mo, for instance, yung attitude ng Aquino government, what is ours, then that doesn't leave room for compromise. No? Because it's ours. We're saying it's ours. Bakit mo i-share? Bakit mo papapasukin yung iba? And then because we are legalistic, we will say that if Arroyo really gave away or allowed China to and Vietnam to develop what is Philippine territory, then it's impeachable. It's treason. Huh? If you stick to the law, then you can say it's treason. Now, if your framework is that the South China Sea dispute has been going on for many decades, there is no solution in sight, the tensions are escalating, China is becoming an even more powerful contender and adversary, and therefore if you don't solve it now, down the line, mas mahirap nang i-manage ang China kasi baka mas malakas na siya. In the meantime, we're not using the oil. We need the oil and gas. Hindi natin magamit because we are afraid that our attempts to explore haharangin ng China. So if you can take this very principled and legalistic approach, which in a way describes the Aquino government position, or you can take a pragmatic approach which may describe the Arroyo position, no? Kanya joint marine seismic undertaking, a lot of economic cooperation with China. Now, as for Duterte, hindi ka na pwedeng bumalik dun sa pragmatic lang kasi meron kang legal victory na pinangahawakan, di ba? So, yung principled and legalistic position mo, nagbunga na. No? And you have to carry that forward. No? So, you cannot simply set it aside. No? So, you might say that our policy towards China in the South China Sea, it's like a pendulum. We swing from left to right, no? From one extreme to the other. So, my sense is that the way forward for Duterte is to find a center, no? Where we can try to be both principled and pragmatic. No? Meaning, pragmatic because open to other solutions. No? But of course, still very much protective of our national interest. That's what this is all about. No? And very much respectful of our laws, no? to the extent na mahahanap solusyon.
So, ma'am, if ever po na i-undertake niya talaga yung joint development po, tapos i-declare siya ng, tapos in the middle of it all, bilang pumasok po yung Korte Suprema sa may unconstitutional to, itikin natin lahat together. Ma-exacerbate po ba niya yung issue? So parang masisira po ba tayo sa China? Katulad po na nangyari nung sa NBNCTE, ganyan.
Yeah. Kasi ako tingin kong problema dun sa nakaraan, yung JMSU, NBNCTA, gano'n is, especially the JMSU, I don't think the Arroyo government was acting in good faith. Kasi pumasok ka sabi mo lang seismic survey lang yan, hindi siya exploration, no? Hindi siya exploitation, so hindi pa siya unconstitutional. No? Alam mong magkakaproblema ka. I mean, logically, if you find that there is, bountiful supply of oil, anong gagawin mo? Of course, you will have, if all the three parties find na mahalaga yung oil dyan, they will want to exploit. Tapos doon mo sasabihin na bawal yan sa konstitusyon namin, kanya-amin lang yan. So, the strategy of JMSU was not done in good faith. Because they knew that there were constitutional obstacles. Everybody was saying, all the lawyers, DOJ, yun ang objection nila. And yet, we proceeded. So, if there's going to be a next time, if there's going to be joint development, we will have to settle those issues. No? The Philippines will have to find a way. No? Interpretation, I don't know, you are the law students. No? Some interpretation of the law that will allow some creative application of the 60-40 formula that we can argue is consistent with our constitution and yet allows Chinese participation. No? It may possibly mean also na hindi mo papangangalandakan. Na nag-joint development tayo, it's under Philippine law, so China is respecting Philippine sovereignty, is recognizing Philippine sovereignty. Of course, the minute you say that, tapos ka na, atras na ang China. No? So, if the law will prevail, my feeling, walang solusyon. Now, if we rely on diplomacy, meaning diplomacy defined as the art of the possible. Kung whatever legal calisthenics you need to engage in, diba? Because ang definition mo ng national interest is we want joint development because we need the oil, because we can't afford the tensions with China, for whatever reason. Kung yun ang define mo, na we want joint development, it's good for us, then you find a way. No? And relying on the law alone will not provide that way. No?
So, ma'am, the best approach is really to uphold the law, but at the same time, to go with the pragmatic approach, which is really not to alienate China.
Yeah, well, yes. It will have to be a balancing act. The objective is not, it's not that the objective is not to alienate China. The objective is not to exacerbate the tensions. Because you're looking for a solution. So ano bang gusto natin? Gusto natin na principle tayo, territorial integrity, sovereignty, etc. That's fine. But there are trade-offs. You don't get to explore the oil. You maybe don't get to fish in all the areas na kahit sinabi pa ng arbitration ruling. Meaning that's the realm of real politics. Diba? Hindi mo maiwasan yan. Hindi ka big power siya. So kahit na gaano ka laki yung paniniwala mo na tama ka, that you have to uphold the law, it's not going to give you the solutions that you need. So it's really a combination. Law is important because it's generalized principles and norms, di ba? So we all play under the same rules. Yun ang halaga ng law. Diplomacy is important because it lets you escape from the rigidity of the law. Hindi naman generalized principles lang, no? but flexible interpretations, compromises, give and take. Yun naman ang role ng diplomacy. Even military is important, diba? Because if you negotiate, if you try to negotiate, when the minute you say that you are ready to negotiate, that means only one thing: you are ready to compromise. So if the two parties sit down to negotiate, then both will have to make compromises. It may take 2 months, it may take 40 years. You don't really know when you can come to some agreement, diba? And the process will be very much influenced by international politics, no? By, say, technological development. So, halimbawa, merong bagong source ng renewable energy na hindi mo na kailangan ng oil and gas na yan. Then, parang, bali, wala lahat ng pinag-aawayan natin for all these years kasi hindi na pala kailangan, di ba? So, even a technological development might render this, useless, yung ganong away, yung ganong contest for resources. So many things can happen. The military part is, if the Philippines negotiates with China, ang hawak natin yung arbitration ruling, then China has no real incentive to agree to anything that we want. Pero kung hawak mo yung arbitration ruling, medyo umaaligid ang US. Yan. Tapos meron kang modernization ng military na ginagawa. Then you are upping the ante. No? You are increasing the stakes for China. No? So pag-iisipan ngayon ng China, mas maganda na hindi na lang kasali ang US sa solusyon, diba? That means China will have to offer some compromises to convince the Philippines na wag na natin isama ang US sa usapan. So it's really combination of the legal, the diplomatic, the defense dimension, and the economics.
Follow-up po ba kayo?
Actually, ma'am, we would like to close it now on this note. And it's very interesting for us because we were always taught about the law, but in this instance, we see that it's not just about the law, but it's also, especially in terms of foreign relations, you also have to consider how to use the law and at the same time do it in a pragmatic manner so that we can really maximize such rulings as this one. So, yun po yung main takeaway.
Yeah, okay, yes. But the other thing is culture, no? If I may just add a little bit. No? Because we have a legalistic culture. No? Because we were trained early in our colonial growth natin. Now, China is different. No? China's political culture, it's not legalistic. It's always been pragmatic. No? That's why they're good businessmen, diba sabi natin. No? Kasi pragmatic ang orientation nila. No?
Historically, because their claim is based on history, while us it's more of legal.
Yeah, right. No? And China has such a long written history. Diba? So for them, if it was in the history books, then it must be true. No? And this written history has been there for thousands of years. So it must be, it must be valid. No? And they have been they have put it in their textbooks. So yun ang tinuturo nila sa mga bata nila that it's ours. No? So it's not easy to say that an arbitration panel composed of 5 people will overturn all of those thousands of years of belief nila that this is theirs. And that's why China is also suspicious about international law, diba? Because China feels that the Western powers also used international law as an instrument. I mean, saan ba galing yan? Yung international law na yan, basically creations of the West. Yun ang tingin ng China. When these agreements were negotiated, China was weak. Now China is strong. So China wants to change some of the terms. Hindi naman pwede. Di ba? Or if China wants to change, then find a place in the rule-making table, convince the others, not coerce them. And it's something for China's future agenda. Hindi pwedeng pumirma siya sa UNCLOS and then sasabihin niya na pumirma ako kasi mahina pa ako noon. Ngayon malakas na ako. So ayoko nang sumunod dyan. So hindi na pwede yon. And that's what China in a way still has to learn. Yung gano'n. Kasi hindi nga sila a big supporter of international. They're mistrustful of other big powers. They think law is an instrument na ginagamit ng other big powers lang. Diba? And as a matter of fact, if you look at, maybe if you have subjects on comparative law, in China, they emphasize very much rule of law domestically. So I once asked a senior Chinese scholar, bakit sa domestic politics yung may campaign pa kayo na rule of law? Yan. Pero ang international law, hindi nyo pinapansin. No? So, ang sagot nila is yung international law kasi hindi naman law yan eh. International politics pa rin yan. So law is an instrument of politics as far as they're concerned, no? Sa international. Pero domestically, they see that they have a very complex society. They need law to prevent chaos. No? They need law para may social contract between state and society. So they understand that. Pero yung sa international law, hindi pa rin nila makuha that it's for the same purpose. No? It's also to prevent chaos. It's also to prevent big powers from abusing their power against small ones.
Instead, they see it lang po as a means of perpetrating power.
Yeah. Right. So,